Hey there, YouTube. It's Petey Two Finger. Today we're going to be talking about the PV Decade. This is a small practice amp, came out in the 80s. Generally considered to be kind of a garbage product, like it would sell for $20 to $50 at the most. And no one really cared about the PV Decade. It's at the bottom of the PV line. Like they don't make a smaller amp than the Decade, and that year it's the smallest one. It had a battery plug in the back. You could plug it in to a battery. Really, nobody really knew or cared about it. Now there's this guy, Josh Hamami. He's popular with hipsters. So it's Caius, Queens of the Stone Age, that Crooked Vulture. There's another band. They were at the Bataclan. I don't know who those guys are. I don't know much about Josh Hamami. My impression that I get from him is that he's the type of guy that spends a lot of time staring at himself in the mirror, that he's just obsessed with his own looks. And he does a lot of posing where it's just him color coordinating his guitars with his outfits to make sure everything matches, and then staring in the mirror to practice making faces for when the camera's on him. So this music is really basic, simple, 4 on the floor, 120 beats per minute and up. American rock and roll. There's not much to it, but one thing that I will say about these guys is they always used weird amplifiers, weird guitar sounds. So when you hear it, it doesn't sound familiar. And that's really smart. I'm not saying that Josh Homme's a goof. He's a smart guy. He really is. So Josh Homme was not one who was known to kiss and tell when it comes to his guitar tone secrets. As a matter of fact, he was a zipper lip. He wasn't giving it up. And then one day, 3 years ago, on this Apple TV Guitar Moves television show, whenever it was, and I remember seeing it when it came out, he just jumps up out of nowhere. He's like, here's our tone secret. It's this tiny PV amp. And I remember thinking, like, this has got to be, this dude has heard stories about Billy Corgan's op amp Big Muff costing $600 when the last time he bought one it was 90, but he mentioned it in a Guitar Player ad, so now they're $600. Meaning, Josh is throwing out this name of this obscure piece of gear as a joke, a test to see how high will the market push the value of this up on his statement. So it's a brilliant method of self-promotion is what it is. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant move. Now, first off, in this video, I have to give credit where credit is due. This video would not exist if it wasn't for Fran Blanche, this YouTube channel. All this information basically comes from there. And if you are interested in legitimately decoding the secrets behind Josh Homme's guitar tones, I would direct you to the Eric Stored Range YouTube channel, where he's done just a phenomenal job at figuring out the amplifiers, the guitars, and the sounds of Josh Homme. Now, when we think of peavey, we think of these amplifiers from the 80s, these bandits, this decade, the backstage amp. Boy, there's a lot of them. I typically would not expect to see $1,000 for a decade, considering it's a pre, post, and a 3-band EQ. There's not much to it. Anytime when you see the pre and the post control with the blue knob, oh look, there's the 12-volt port I was talking about. But what I'm getting back to is everything all the way up to the band at 65, they all use the same circuitry in the preamp. So what this means is you could go out and spend $1,000 and get the PV Decade, but all of those old PV amps have the same circuitry, so they sound the same. With a combo solid state practice amp, there's 3 elements that combine to make the sound. First is the preamp. That's where you plug it in. It brings the volume up. It shapes the tone. There's a distortion or not. You can adjust that. Then there's an equalizer for additional tone shaping controls. So you can't plug a preamp into a speaker. It doesn't produce enough power to move a speaker, but it produces enough power for the power amp. That's the next stage. That's what does the work of pushing the speakers and making it loud. And so like if there's a 5-watt amp and there's a 50-watt amp, well, you can imagine that 50-watt amp is way louder than the 5-watt. So when we talk about watts or power amps, it's not tone shaping amp, it's just powering the speaker. And it has nothing to do with the tone. The other element would be the speaker itself, which has a huge impact on how we hear what we hear. And the chassis, the wood, the size. Like a small box is going to sound smaller than a big box. So smaller 8-inch speaker with a smaller 8-inch box is going to give you a quieter sound. It's going to be less bass. It's better for an apartment. It won't bother your neighbors. But if you're playing to keep up with a drummer, you're going to want at least one 12-inch speaker and like a 50 or 65-watt amp. So at the end of the line, if we find out all these old PV amps have the same preamp, and that's the most important tone shaper, and they're all the same, well, why would you go after the Decade? Why would you, unless you were playing a game and you wanted to see how expensive you could jack the price up by your own word of mouth. So it's a brilliant trick that it's a ruse that he played. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I got to say, this video, all the credit goes to that Fran Blanche. You should subscribe to that channel. That channel is awesome. Fran Lab put out a series of guitar pedals that have a really good reputation. And it's not all guitar based, it's technology, science based. That channel is very much fun. So here we got this guy who his music is all kind of repetitive and simple, basic rock and roll. It's hooky, it's catchy, and the main thing about it is that the tones of the guitars are different. They're not the standard Keith Richards Start Me Up. It's not David Gilmour or Slash Welcome to the Jungle. These are unique and fuzzy, although he's not using fuzz pedal sounds. So he used a lot of old like Ampeg, which people think Ampeg is bass. And that's not his secret. Some people think, oh, he's using all bass amps. No. Old Ampeg VT40. There's a MOSFET amp that he used that really had a unique distortion. So heading over to that Swedish guy's channel, you'll be able to see and hear all that. And it is really cool. The sounds are great. I'm not a fan of Caius or Queen of a Stone Age or that Crooked Vulture. I really don't like that other band. Really, really don't like that band that played at the Bataclan. That guy, I don't like that cocaine PVR guy. I do not like that guy. I really, really, really do not like that guy. So why do you have this guy coming out on an Apple TV show saying, here's my tone secret? Unless that wasn't his tone secret. Maybe it was one they used and they tried, but they didn't really like it. So maybe there was another secret. Maybe there was a real secret that still remains a secret. And this is where the Fran Blanche video comes in. So here it is, the mag amp. Some people would say, oh, that's a Bogan. Well, Bogan never made anything with this layout. Bogan never made anything with LED or a panel lamp on the left. Bogan never made anything with a built-in speaker on the top. This is not a Bogan. What it is, the mag amp. So back in the day, they used film. They had optical sound. And at one point in the mid 60s, early 70s, they started using 16 millimeter film that had a strip of magnetic audio tape on the side of the film. So they could shoot, they could develop it, rush develop it, and have the sound already there, synchronized on the tape. It's physically there. Brilliant idea. Now, they had these huge desks in all the studios where they could edit 16 millimeter, big spools and reels and a viewing thing, editing machine where they would cut and splice together the film. And they merely needed to attach a tape machine head and line that up where it would hit the magnetic tape, and then run a line from that head to an outboard, an external mag amp. So that's what this product was. They weren't made in bulk for consumers. This was like a custom made product that was sold just to these studios to modify their 16 millimeter editing bay. So it's a weird thing. And I'll tell you what, not too long after that, videotape came in and just took over. So this was a niche product that was only floating around for 5-10 years. And then when they switched everything over to video, here they had all these massive editing bays that they got rid of, and these smaller outboard amps would end up finding their ways to pawn shops, flea markets, garage sales, into the hands of engineer electronic boffin types and musicians, which was why Josh Homme was collecting them. So there was a guy, this is my United States of whatever, that guy, Liam Lynch, I don't know if you remember him. He's got a band called The Electric Suite, and that's like acid pop. It's not for everyone, and he does video or animated like space cartoons. He wears these masks and he plays 3 different roles of androids, and it's all himself. And he must just have a ball putting this stuff together. So that Electric Suite, it's kind of bizarre, but I like it, and the music it's great. Liam Lynch is just a gem of a human being, and if you get him, you get him. If you don't, you probably really don't get it. I'm a huge fan of Liam Lynch's. He had a podcast back in 2007. He was friends with Josh Homme. He went over there and shot an episode where there it was with a mic on it on the floor in Josh's studio, this mag amp. So there was a tone secret. It more than likely was this mag amp. We just don't know what the model was because it was probably a one-off. It wasn't like a kit bash thing. It was custom made. So this is a really cool idea, certainly not out of reach. People love building these little chip amps. They love using the LM386. That has a built-in distortion. It never really cleans up, and the problem with that is it leaves a nasty artifact at the release of your note. So if you hold a note and sustain it to the point where it totally gets dead quiet, it never will. There'll be hissing, sputtering, spitting, pops and clicks. It's just, the LM386 is nasty. Now there's another chip, TDA 7052, TPA 7052A. They're different. The one with the A, 2 of the pins on the 8-pin chip are reserved to plug in a volume knob. You can basically if you're going to build one of these amps, it's an 8-pin chip. 2 of the pins are for the power, 2 of the pins are for the speaker, 2 of the pins are for the input, the guitar, and 2 of the pins are for the pot. So it's really simple. There's a slightly more advanced perf board design. It's called the punch amp. You buy the chip, they're a couple bucks. The other one that I was talking about, the one that everyone builds, the mini guitar amp is, or battery amp or cigar box amp, that's a LM386. Those are like, you can get those chips for a nickel, a quarter maybe. They're really affordable IC chip. 8-pin, LM386-N, is it? They have like 4 different letters of the suffix that denote the power rating, supposedly. They're all like a half watt. It's 9 volts. The maximum output power is a half a watt. Well, the punch amp is a full 1 watt at 9 volts. So why you would want to build something that's unbelievably noisy, it's half as powerful as its competitor. Mind you, they're a little bit more expensive to get this chip. They're like $1, maybe $1.50. I seem to remember getting 5 of those chips for $7.50 shipped. You just got to watch out for fakes. But I love the punch amp, the TDA 7052. They're phenomenal. I never built one with there's something called a runoff groove tone mender. So this is a little circuit that you build. It's got 4 knobs. There's a gain, and it's not a distortion. It's a clean equalizer. So it's bass, mid-range, treble. There's a gain. It gives you a lot of boosting. And then there's a switch that's like a bright switch. It gets brighter. It shifts a mid hump. So you can set that up to be like more like a Vox or a Marshall or a Fender sound, depending on how you set it and adjusting that bright switch. But I tend to brighten it up, nooner on the mid, 75% on the treble, and 25% on the bass, and I'm just in heaven. I love the tone mender, and I'll pair it up with like a much more powerful Class D chip and a 12-inch speaker. No, and those make really wonderful guitar amps. Wonderful. It's not going to give you the dirt like we're talking about this decade. That's for cranking it and getting this distortion sound. Where I'm doing, the way that I do it is completely different. I use an amp modeler where I'm getting the dirt in the digital model. And I use a germanium range master in the effects loop of that device to compensate for the fact that it's digital. And it does a great job at that. So that's just the way that I do it. I do have, I've seen people that are in possession of mag amps that use them for guitar. Every time I see an amp, metal amp, little lab amp that has a small speaker or an oval speaker, that's the real special one. People tend to just love them. And they'll say, I don't know what it is about this little amp, but it sounds different. And I think it's because the box is metal. So this is a punch amp. You can see originally there were these ports back here, VGA. This was a KVM. Now I epoxied that and then shot some paint. It's got this bypasses the speaker, so you can plug a speaker cable into this amp into another whatever speaker cabinet and use this as the power amp. Here's the input. It has a built-in buffer, a JFET like a Tillman, so it's a J201, which is a type of transistor that on paper behaves very similar to the way that a vacuum tube behaves. So this is buffered, which is important. If you don't have the buffer, anything you plug in, it's going to really sound different depending on the load, and it will go from bad to worse, where with the buffer, they all sound the same. The high end is there, the bright chimey sound. So the speaker, you can see here, these are the full dimension of where these bolts are. That's the full dimension of the speaker, and it's a smaller hole. I used a hole saw, which was really tore it up. I used the hole saw to cut the sheet metal, and it removed the teeth off the blade of that tool. It was like a one-time use. And then this speaker grill, I got this off of a Sony bookshelf speaker. So the driver in here, the actual speaker, is something like a woofer from a bookshelf speaker. It's a really hefty magnet. It's a shielded speaker. So this is 5 watt. It's got an internal 9.6 volt nickel metal hydride battery in here, which is a battery that's used for something like a remote control car would use this cell. You can plug a power supply in here and recharge this battery, or run it off of AC. You can see the battery's pretty dead. But this is a wonderful sounding amplifier. It has something to it, which I always like to attribute that to the metal. And I never really experimented with different distortions or pushing this, although I would like to. Maybe I will at some point. I've been doing my line in direct recording using amp modeling for so long. So, no, I had 1/2-inch tape machines, reel to reel with Dolby noise reduction, rack mount, outboard stuff, synchronized to a computer that ran a MIDI sequencer with all kinds of synthesizers and drum modules. And that was how I started in the 90s. Now I'm down to just multi-track. I've got a 6x10 interface that I use, and I've compromised. But it is what it is, and I'm able to work real efficiently, even though I have chronic pain, and I'm able to boogie. I can get it done in a short period of time. Like, I can do a whole song in like 6 hours, and be proud of it at the end of the day, and be proud of the quality of the sound, So, obviously, in a professional studio, I would not be doing that. I would be miking amps, and something like this would be just a wonderful tool. So, the mag amp thing really is interesting. Obviously, when you listen to the Queens of the Stone Age, I can say, oh, I really don't like that guy, but the tones in the music they're awesome. I'm not going to kid anybody. I'm not going to pretend like I don't think that that's exemplary or extraordinary, that his work in the studio speaks for itself, and that his music has developed this reputation of standing on its own and having these unique guitar timbres. That's awesome. Hats off to the people who have worked with that guy and helped him to forge that sound. I think that is really cool. But as far as a lot of the personal stuff and the message behind that music, it really doesn't jive with my like monogamous thing, and just like where I'm at. Like, I don't like people that carry themselves like they're hipster elites, and that's just not for me. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not a fan of that music. But the elements that we're talking about with the tone, I really admire that work. And there's nothing, I can't sit here and down talk anybody. I mean, if they're like, they beat up their wife and they've like fight huge custody battle for the kids, and there's restraining orders, and the guy's got a reputation as being a womanizer. Well, if you live your life like that, there's a price you're going to pay, and that's people like me are going to shit talk you on YouTube. And I'm just going to come out and say it. I don't like people that are like that. I firmly believe when you see like a couple of ducks and you know that these birds they've made it for life. Like, I see stuff like that as being like the meaning behind. The world can be really hard and overwhelming and cold. I can see like really ultimate beauty in like seeing an old couple together. To me, that's what it's all about, and I find that to be worth so much more than anything, any amplifier or guitar tone. You know what I mean? So coming out of the other end and having somebody bragging and laughing about macking on women, or oh, the other day I met a little 38-year-old, that type of stuff, judging people by their age, commodifying women as sex objects. That is the quickest way that I will lose respect for you. So I can't apologize for who I am. Yesterday I did a video on Roger Waters and I had a guy come in and leave kind of a nasty comment. The point of the video was people are coming out en masse and attacking Roger Waters, calling him an anti-Semite, when I see him speaking at the United Nations Security Council with a message of peace, an anti-war message. And I just want to stand up and be counted as somebody that believes in Roger Waters and his message of peace for humanity. And I stand behind that. And it has nothing to do with whatever side he picked in the Israel versus Palestine fight. It has nothing to do with that. This has nothing to do with Zionism, Jews, none of that. It's just, if I have to pick between war and peace, I'm going to pick peace. And I like that. I like when I see someone speaking up for that. I say, go. That's what we need. We don't want war. We don't want that. The situation in the Ukraine, I've had this bad feeling about this is going to lead up to World War III, and now there's some light. Maybe this is going to actually be over, and I am just absolutely over the moon and thrilled. And that has nothing to do with who's president or who really is president. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So I just wanted to stand up and be counted as a person who stands up for love and for peace. That's what I'm all about. And that doesn't, when I say love, that doesn't mean a one night stand. That doesn't mean shacking up with some woman who's got an old man waiting on her at home. You know what I mean? You don't need to seek out the companionship of, you can find a woman. You don't need to, well, if you're doing that, because there's guys that's what they're all about. Well, you can do that, but you're going to end up losing respect from people like me. And this is the United States. I'm free to say what I want, right, buddy? Anyway, you guys, I'm going to cut you loose. Good guitar tone is where you make it. And by make it, I mean it's going to be a little bit of work. It won't happen on the first thing. You may have to take what you set up, tear it all down, get something else, and start over. But trial and error, and the more you keep on keeping on, you get better every time you go through the process. So that's the message: is stick-to-itiveness, and you will reap your success in your continued succession of harvests. So I hope that made sense. You guys, I hope you're comfy out there. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. Hug your pets. That's really important. And peace.